You're listening to episode 155, Travis's story, a daughter with cystic fibrosis. Hello, my friends. Welcome to Child Life on Call. This podcast is a safe place for parents to share their stories about what it's like to have a child that has a medical experience, diagnosis, disease, and or everything in between. We know there's power in sharing stories, and that power multiplies when you can listen to other parents who have walked a similar path to yours. Giving and getting advice is great, but hearing how another parent navigates the complexities and nuances of healthcare is even better. As a child life specialist, my role is to support, validate, and provide emotionally safe spaces for kids and their families, and I am so honored to be on this journey with you. In addition to parent stories, we sprinkle in some expert episodes every now and again that have content for both parents and professionals in the field of healthcare, all with the mission to empower parents to be confident advocates and partners with the care team during healthcare experiences. We're so glad you're here. Hello, my friends. I'm so honored that you're joining us today. We have another dad on the podcast, which I'm pretty proud of the past track record that we've had over the past few months in a podcast that has mostly been mom sharing. Dads are coming forward. We had Gavin and Cindy's story. We have Ryan's story coming up. We had swaps last month. We had NICU dad Alex. And today I get to introduce you to Travis. Travis's daughter was and has cystic fibrosis. This is actually the first CF story that we have had on the podcast, which makes it even more important because we know how many families are affected by CF. Travis talks a little bit about his journey and kind of his path to self-discovery and really feeling like he was an entrepreneur to begin with and then had this whole new path of really creating Piper's Angels, which aims to be a supportive community, both financially and emotionally, to families facing CF. And that's actually his first word of advice to parents is get connected to other CF families. But which is probably advice that any family can take at that's looking at this kind of lifelong diagnosis that is such a game changer. Such a game changer, in fact, that Travis and his family are in Florida because that's where the salty air is and that's what's best for Piper, according to her doctor. So thank you so much for being here. This is just a 30-minute interview, and I really encourage you to listen to the whole entire thing because Travis makes some incredibly important points for both parents and healthcare professionals to hear. Before we jump into the episode, I wanted to let you guys know that if you are a parent, a child life specialist, or professional working with children, you're going to want the hospital or physician's office or urgent care that you take your kids to have the Child Life On Call app. It is an evidence-based tool designed to empower children and families during medical experiences. And 100% of the child life specialists who have used this app believe that it can help with expanding child life's reach beyond the bedside. And 100% of child life specialists believe it helps parents feel more empowered in their child's care. Learn how to get the Child Life On Call app for your facility or doctor's office by going to childlifeoncall.com/partners.
My name is Travis Suit, and I'm 39 years old. I live in Palm Beach County, Florida, and I have a beautiful daughter named Piper, who is 15 years old, who was diagnosed with cystic fibrosis at 4 years old.
Okay, gotcha. And so I know you also come from a blended family too, so you have some other kids as well, is that right?
Yeah, so our family consists of Lucy and Piper, who are both 15 years old,
Okay.
Two 15-year-old girls, and then an 11-year-old son. And then with my partner, Danny, we have a 11-month-old boy.
Oh my goodness. So you have all ages and stages right now.
It's a wonderful mix.
How has it been with the 11-month-old after having older kiddos for a while? Was it like a blast from the past?
yes, it was definitely like hitting the, restart button,
Yeah.
but in a very different and dynamic way because, having the older kids there and getting to see their interactions, it definitely has like softened the edge with them, as
Yeah.
teenage girls and as a 11-year-old son, they're like, they're starting to develop into very much their own person and their own ideas and vision for their life. But the baby has been like this super glue of love, kind
Oh,
of to keep everybody together.
yeah. Oh, I love that. A super glue of love. Oh my goodness, that is so cool. I think that's such a good way to put it. And I can totally see that for sure. Well, talk to us a little
And he's a
bit.
great baby. He's been a wonderful baby. Like he's a very happy baby. He likes to laugh a lot. He has been a good sleeper. He's been a good eater.
Oh my
So we feel
goodness.
very fortunate. Yeah.
Well, that is just, you can't ask for anything more than that.
Yeah.
Well, why don't you kind of walk us through? I know you mentioned just kind of right off the bat that Piper was diagnosed with cystic fibrosis or CF at the age of 4. And can you walk us through kind of what the beginning stages of finding out that she had something going on with her was like, what that was like for you?
Yeah. From the time she was an infant, up through probably around 18 months old, she had some signs of respiratory issues, a lot of coughing, a lot of mucus production. And, the doctors would say, well, it's just normal kid crud. She's, just dealing with that. And even all the way up until she was 4, it was kind of always off and on. She'd go on a round of antibiotics and steroids. It would knock it back. Then, a couple months later, it would be really heavy again. And it was tough because, as a little girl and, a child, like listening to her sleep at night, she would be coughing in coughing fits,
Mm.
coughing up a storm while she was sleeping. And it sounded like she, like a smoker's cough that you would hear after 50 years of smoking, right? It was just like this deep, visceral, heavy, wet cough. And, that just as a parent, it makes you cringe to the core, right? Like
Yeah.
to hear that. I mean, it's almost somewhat torturous to be sleeping in another room while hearing, your child dealing with that in the other room. And so, the diagnosis came after a checkup with her doctor. He said, look, I think she needs a chest x-ray. They did a chest x-ray, determined that she had a walking pneumonia. And, he said, look, it's not normal for a little girl at 4 years old to be developing these conditions. I think there must be something more going on.
Mm.
And he suggested, we get a bunch of tests done. And one of those was cystic fibrosis. I was in a pretty adamant state of denial that it was going to be anything serious. Like I was like, well, I'm sure it's whatever. Like, I mean, and at this point we didn't know CF was in our family genetically. So they ran the test. They did a CF sweat chloride test, and the tests came back positive. And they tested her twice. So 2 positive tests that she had cystic fibrosis. And I was on my way to work when her mom called me and told me the news, and it was in that moment, I got off the phone with her mom. I pulled over. I was really upset. I was crying. I was angry. I was kind of like almost, enraged
Mm.
a bit, that this was happening. And it was heartbreaking. It was, just earth shattering to find that out. And at the same time, on a very deep level, there was a sense of relief that at least we knew what was wrong.
Right.
And it was kind of that balancing there. And I'm a very action-oriented person. I'm an entrepreneur. And so, immediately my mind, it's like went to like, well, what's the next step? What's the solution? What's the action that needs to be taken? And you get online and you do research. And of course, the online research is terrible. The results you'll find if you Google cystic fibrosis, and it's better these days, but it used to be pretty horrifying.
Yeah.
What you'd see people, dying at a young age, getting transplants, kind of drowning in their own mucus type of scenarios, like a lot of really, really rough stuff. And so it hit pretty hard, and it hit my family pretty hard too. I think my parents kind of felt guilty, this is a genetic disease and now it's showing up in the family. And within a short time, so, a lot of people, they know about Piper and her story, but, my oldest half sister was diagnosed with cystic fibrosis the same year Piper was. And in fact, she was diagnosed before Piper, but our family didn't know, we didn't know what it was. And she wasn't really we just had no idea that this was related,
Right.
That what my oldest half sister from my dad's first marriage had and was diagnosed late in life because she had less severe symptoms because she had a different genetic variation, had anything to do with my daughter. And I even remember my older sister, Leanne, messaging me and saying like, hey, it could be related. And I remember just being in that like state of denial. Like,
yeah.
This has not, whatever you have has nothing to do with what Piper has, or what Piper's going through. And so within 12 months, it really this, onset of this diagnosis for my sister and for Piper and for our family really became the focal point of everything that our lives began to revolve around.
Mm. That's a lot to take in, and so completely ironic or random, or I don't even know what the word is, that your sister and your daughter would get that diagnosis. How much older, I guess, is your sister? And is that typical to kind of go your whole life and then be diagnosed a little bit later with CF?
Well, it's not typical. The majority of people who have cystic fibrosis are now pre-screened before they're born because they do that now. They didn't used to. Like Piper didn't get pre-screened, but now they do pre-screenings at birth in most states. A lot of people are diagnosed within the first 12 months of life as an infant. But what we're learning is that there are thousands of genetic variations of cystic fibrosis. There are some of the main genetic types that produce the more severe symptoms, which is what Piper has. My sister Leanne has one of the main genetic types, but then an obscure nonsense mutation, which is what they call it. And so she's had less severe symptoms, but she went untreated. So she was diagnosed at 40, the same year Piper was diagnosed at 4. Piper has had severe disease expression up and through, her childhood, where, Leanne, it was like intermittent, but it was progressively getting worse because cystic fibrosis is a progressive disease.
Sure.
So, she had already had half a lung removed at the Mayo Clinic. She had been battling these health issues, but never knew. We just didn't know what it was. She didn't know what it was. And so you just see every person is different. And you can even have a family with 2 children with cystic fibrosis. And even those 2 children, even though they have the same genes and the same disposition, the gene expression can be different. One can have more lung and sinus issues. The other one can have more digestional issues. So it really depends on the person. It's very strange. And to give you an idea of how strange it can become, like people out there who think they have, bronchiectasis, or think they have sinus issues, or think they have just bad digestional issues, or think that they have, let's say, allergies. Any of those are symptoms of cystic fibrosis, and they could just have a very mild to moderate form of cystic fibrosis and they don't know it. In the example I'll share with you, which is kind of what makes our family story so strange, is that a couple years after Piper and Leanne were diagnosed, my sister, my full-blooded sister from my mom and my dad's second marriage, Nikki, when she was pregnant, she got sick and she got tested, and it come to find out that she had 2 CF genes. And then eventually I got tested and I had the 2 same CF genes that she had, but those are different. We have a different gene expression than Piper and Leanne because we all had different moms, but it's the same paternal gene. So there's 4 of us in one family that have cystic fibrosis, but my symptoms, I have very light mucus production, very light digestive disturbances, and that's it. I've been healthy, athletic my whole life. I mean, most people would say I'm in pristine health, yet I have some symptoms, but they're extremely light. If it wasn't for Piper and my sister Leanne, I would have never known that on paper, genetically, I have cystic fibrosis. And there are thousands of people out there who have CF and don't realize that they have it.
That's so interesting. And, you know, I'm hearing kind of what you're saying about, it's so evident that you're one of those like go-getters, find the answer to the problem, entrepreneur type. I feel like I can just hear it kind of come through your voice that you're really good at investigating and getting curious and finding out what's going on. How has that part of your personality shaped how you were a father to her?
In a big way, because after her diagnosis, you know, I really wanted to learn as much as possible, but I was being introduced to people, you know, hey, go talk to this other father. He has a daughter with cystic fibrosis. So I'd go and have that conversation. Hey, go meet this person, you know, and it was like, oh, you know, and each time I had one of those meetings, it would just open my mind to so much, and I would learn so much. And I felt like that was really coaching me on how to be a better dad for Piper. So it's just like as many people as I could meet, as much as I could learn. And then I was introduced into the CF community through the National Cystic Fibrosis Foundation. And, you know, when they learned about, you know, Piper and I, they invited me out to one of their events, and I got to see and feel the experience of like community, you know, and it was like, oh my gosh, you know, it really does make you feel so much better when you're going through something and you feel so vulnerable that there's all these people, you know, who care. Yeah. And that was, you know, really like this immersion into the community taught me so much. And that was before I ever understood definitively what advocacy was. That was my introduction to it. But I didn't realize that's what was happening. Was I was learning how to advocate, you know, and learning how to embody advocacy. And so, you know, that was kind of the beginning of that. And ultimately, you know, as Piper grew up, you know, she had recurring lung infections, but it wasn't until she was 8 years old that did she get really, really even, you know, more sick. And when she was 8, she was in the hospital for long periods of time, you know, up to 6 weeks at a time. She ended up getting a long-term feeding tube that was in for 2 years because she was so underweight, and weight supports lung function. She was in extreme pain, pleuritic chest pain, where the inflammation in the lungs was, you know, where that inflammation in the sensitive tissue touches the ribs and other places, it causes extreme acute pain. She got a port for long-term at-home antibiotics and steroids. So, you know, that was really the turning point for me personally, where everything I had been doing in life up until that point really became futile. You know, like entrepreneurially, it was really hard for me to pour the same amount of energy and passion into devoting myself to these other projects and ventures and things where it was like all I could think about was Piper. Yeah. All I could think about was what's next. How can I help more? What can we do? And then as I got to meet these families, and as I went through that process, and we as a family went through that process of balancing schedules and time, trying to be there with Piper in the hospital, the expenses outside of the medical expenses, which mostly were covered, thank goodness, through, the government and through these, programs that are there for children with terminal illnesses. Outside of that, the financial burden of managing all of that, the time, the logistics, the psychological and emotional roller coaster of having a sick child with a chronic illness, it all just was like so heavy. And it really, I think, created kind of this pressure in my life where I felt like I was at a crossroads. It was like, what do I do? And I had some really great mentors around me at the time. Luckily, one who had gone through an experience with having a sick daughter. And, he said to me, I was just pouring out in tears in his office one morning because I said I couldn't focus. I couldn't focus on anything, which for me was so unusual that I didn't have clarity. I didn't have vision. I didn't have focus. I didn't know what to do. And he said, sometimes, Travis, you just got to really look at what's most important, and you got to go focus on that.
Yeah.
And I still, to this day, I get so emotional thinking about that moment because it was just so profound, that he kind of gave me this sense of freedom, like this key to, I had to let go of all these relationships I had to let go of businesses I had invested years into. I had to let go of, my relationships to investors and partners. And it was like this tearing away of an old life and an old dream that, had to become, a new life and what was the new dream? What was dreaming with a broken heart looking like, right? Like, how do you reform that vision of life when you're hurting, and I think that was, what was so important about that time. And he helped me, guide me through that. And that's what led to the creation of Piper's Angels Foundation and doing the first Crossing for Cystic Fibrosis event, which is a long distance paddle challenge from the Bahamas to Florida.
Wow.
Came out of all of that. And this connection, that we learned about of the ocean, which, is so beneficial. The salt air and salt water is so beneficial for people with cystic fibrosis in their lungs and the health of their lungs because it provides better airway clearance, which reduces infection rates and keeps them out of the hospital, So it was like, the introduction to that and the opportunity with that and getting Piper out into like a very healthy, positive environment was a pretty major lifestyle shift that, took on a lot more meaning.
I thank you so much for sharing that specific conversation, because I think when other parents are listening to you right now, you may be doing that for them, is that permission to say that was then and now we have to move forward in a different way. And it's not what we had planned. And maybe it's not what I even want to do, but it's what I have to do. And then from that blossomed this beautiful organization that you've been able to do. And so not only benefiting Piper and your family, but so many others. And that's something that you probably couldn't see at that moment when you had that conversation with your mentor and friend. So I thank you so much for sharing that.
I hope that, if there is anybody out there who's at that point or going through that, I want to strongly encourage and suggest that, talking to people and finding, because in that case, I never expected it to actually be that individual. There were a lot of really important, meaningful people to me around me who were supporting me, but it was, I didn't know he had that experience with his daughter. And so here I am, like sharing, that I'm kind of stuck and, and then he shared that, and it was like, wow.
Wow.
I mean, so
Yeah.
you never know where it's going to come from, but the only way, for other people to be able to offer that kind of support or love is by being vulnerable, and opening up and not being afraid to share it and allow those emotions to process and pass through. And for anybody out there who's listening, I'm available. Like, I'm fully devoted to anybody who is going through that process, that, if they want to reach out and touch base or talk, I'm here and always available for that.
Travis, that's so generous. And I am always amazed when families and parents like you say that, because it's so generous of your time, but you're just describing exactly what you said, which is that connection to other people, that advocacy, that like true sense of community and what it means. And I just want to read, I don't know if you even remember writing this, but I asked, what would you tell a parent whose child may be going through and getting this diagnosis for the first time? And you wrote, there is a lot of hope, and ultimately this diagnosis, if looked upon with the right attitude, can bring about positive impact and transformation for anyone who is connected to this child's life. I think that is so profound, and probably was a difficult perspective to get to, but you got there.
Yeah, and I must say it to myself 100 times a day, and I share it with others now. But like, what I've learned from cystic fibrosis, and what I've learned from Piper and my sister, and being close to people going through a lot of adversity, what I've seen, witnessed, and now understand that I love about life is that adversity is the starting line for courage. And I love courage. Courage is one of my favorite things about humans, is that and for everybody that's different, so courage for somebody has 20% lung function and is carrying around an oxygen tank might look like getting out of bed and going down to get the mail from the mailbox. That's courage for them that day, versus somebody else who might be climbing Mount Everest, or somebody else who it might just be calling, a family member they haven't talked to in 10 years just to make amends. Like, it's like everybody has that new frontier of courage, but ultimately the starting line is adversity. That's where it all begins. It's where you have to make that choice. And it's such a important and powerful place to be in life.
It's that exact moment you had. You're describing all of these things where people are courageous, but you were also incredibly courageous, right? And having to walk away from a lot of security in past relationships and partnerships with investors and all of that. So I think you're pretty courageous too.
Thank you. Well, we all have it, it's all already there. And I really believe that, the adversity is, it's not random, the adversity is it's designed. It's perfectly designed for each one of us, so that we can grow.
So we can make that choice and grow. I love that.
Yeah. And I was just going to say, to piggyback on that, and that growth is like our heart's expansion, right? Mm-hmm. So it's like when we have that opportunity to grow, it's like, well, how far can the heart expand, right? Well, like every one of those new frontiers of courage is kind of like that new place where your heart is expanding into that area of your own, growth. And so it's like, I like to ask that question, because it's fun to play with, like, well, how expansive can the heart become? Well, as far as I can tell, it's infinite,
right?
Because love and compassion are like infinite resources of the human experience of our heart. So it's like, okay, well, then that sets us up for a pretty bold experience of being a human, because it's like, man, that's a pretty expansive, expansive state, right? Like
right.
To know that the love it has no boundaries.
I think that's so perfect. And just one example I always think about is like your love for your children, right? And how despite whatever happens, like it just continues to grow. And it's easy to maybe compare what you're saying with that love that you have for your child.
Yeah, I mean, there's just like you would do anything, right? There's just
Right.
nothing. there's, I
There's
mean,
nothing you wouldn't
it's
do.
yeah.
I'd love to learn a little bit more about Piper's Angels and how people can get connected with your group and what your mission is.
So our mission at Piper's Angels is to support and empower families in the cystic fibrosis community, and that has developed into providing innovative and holistic approaches to healing and to coping with day-to-day activities in life, which can look as simple as financial support, urgent financial assistance when you're going through a long-term hospitalization or a transplant, any medically related need. So we write, on average each month we're writing like, anywhere from 5 to 10 to 15 to 20 grants, that are covering
Wow.
anything medically related. It could be, look, medically related can be very different and vast and variant depending on the person or the family, right? You could have a single mom with 2 children. One has CF and is in the hospital and her car breaks down and she just needs that extra $500 to get the car going again so she can get back and forth to the hospital. That's medically related. That
Right.
child needs that mom in the hospital. Medically related could look like different equipment that supports their daily treatments, right? Like so nebulizers, some people, a nebulizer normally has to be plugged into the wall. Well, what if a parent's traveling? What if the family's on the move and they need a portable nebulizer? There's a lot of different scenarios, but that's, the financial support to me is it's kind of like a Band-Aid. Like it helps. It feels good. It helps get them to that, keep them moving along. But more importantly, it lets them know emotionally and psychologically that there's an organization that's in their corner and rooting for them, right?
That's huge.
So we do a lot of peer-to-peer support that has developed into one of the biggest kind of areas. We spend a lot of our time on the phone and in conversation with families, people who are going through things and just need somebody to connect to and to help guide them through different resources that are available. Just to have a heart-to-heart conversation, is incredibly impactful. So peer-to-peer support, when we track that, we track the number of hours our team is spending, on the phone and in conversation with CF families. We offer different scholarships. We have a scholarship called our Forever Stoked Scholarship, which provides scholarships for saltwater activities. So getting people out, getting them in a healthy, fun, safe, positive environment. Those scholarships cover instruction camps, coaching, equipment, gear, anything saltwater related to encourage them to get out and live their life and to go, be in a healthy environment that can be beneficial and create positive and good memories and experiences. We teach mindfulness and meditation through our program called Unmasking Mindfulness online. So we have typically a spring, summer, and fall cohort that'll have, let's say 6 to 8 participants that are doing an 8-week course that's teaching them the basics of mindfulness and meditation. And that is because when you have a progressive disease like cystic fibrosis, there's a lot of anxiety and stress. There's a lot of mental health issues that arise from, procedural anxiety, existential distress, like things that people just are trying to deal with. And so grounding them in a practice that, they can use in and out of the hospital. They can use it anytime they need it. It quiets their mind. It gets them into a place where they can feel connected to their heart if they're feeling overwhelmed. We've seen incredible testimonial feedback. Yeah, it's always there, right? It's like, so providing those tools is really important. We are launching a breath coaching program in January, which will, same thing, it's going to be a 6 to 8 week program taught online that focuses specifically on ways to sustain and maintain healthy lung function, or even regain healthy lung function. If you're at 50% lung function, it's a big deal if you increase your lung function or capacity by a few percentage points. So there is no breath coaching program in the CF community. So, we're really excited about
Huge.
it.
That's so cool. I mean, just the mindfulness benefits, but the physical benefits that you're going to be offering is great. And that will all be at Piper's Angels. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So, I mean, there's, we're a very inclusive grassroots organization. I like to say that, a small grassroots organization can have a huge impact in a rare disease community, because it's a small group and population. There's only 40,000 people in the U.S. with cystic fibrosis that we're aware of. So we're not talking about a huge population. So really, every volunteer, every dollar does make a big impact. And, we have a lot of volunteer opportunities. We have a big annual challenge, where people can sign up to paddle from the Bahamas to Florida, 80 miles of open ocean, and you can do it as a relay team or as a solo paddler. We have captains and crew and people who get involved. We have nonprofits who participate, and we do a fundraising split with their teams. So we're very active. I'd say we're very hyperactive. We're very hyper responsive to the needs of the community, and we try to act that way. And that's kind of part of the entrepreneurial nature of who we are.
I love that. Well, it's such a dynamic impact too. It's not just one section, but you're doing so much to help so many. And if people want to follow along with you or share with us the Piper's Angels site, that would be great, so people can stay connected.
Yeah, pipersangels.org or Piper's Angels on Instagram and Facebook, or Crossing for CF. We're very active on our Instagram and social media pages. And if anybody ever has any questions, they can reach out to me directly, and I'd be happy to, have those conversations with anybody if they're going through something and facing that adversity and just needing somebody to have a conversation with.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Travis. You're so generous with your time and your stories, and I'm so grateful that we were able to share a little bit about you and Piper's Angels today. So I really appreciate your time.
Oh, thank you so much. This is how organizations like ours grow. We don't have a huge marketing budget, so having the support of media and outlets and podcasts like yours is so important. And thank you for what you're doing, because it's a way to lift voices up that need to be heard, and to provide a platform for advocacy that often is not unsupported.
Man, well, I just feel like the luckiest person in the world to be able to do that and meet people like you. So thank you for saying that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us on the Child Life On Call podcast. The only reason this podcast keeps on going is because of you and listeners like you. So please join in on the conversation with us on Instagram, Facebook. I'm even on TikTok now, y'all, making a fool of myself. I haven't danced yet, but maybe it's coming. You can find us at Child Life On Call. We also have a website, and that has all of our information about the Child Life Circle, about the Child Life On Call app, and a blog with new information all the time. That's childlifeoncall.com. Thank you again from the bottom of my heart for listening to these episodes and being a part of this community. We are so grateful and so honored to be able to provide this for you.